Chapter 12. 12th chapter. It was a Saturday afternoon, gay and brilliant after abundant rains. And the spirit of youth dwelt in it, though the season was now autumn. All that was gracious triumphed. As the motor cars passed through summer street they raised only a little dust, and their stench was soon dispersed by the wind and replaced by the scent of the wet birches or of the pines. Mr. Beebe, at leisure for life's amenities, leant over his rectory gate. Freddie leant by him, smoking a pendant pipe. Degree suppose we go and hinder those new people opposite for a little plus or minus. Degree plus or minus. Degree they might amuse you plus or minus. Freddie, whom his fellow creatures never amused, suggested that the new people might be feeling a bit busy, and so on, since they had only just moved in. Degree, I suggested we should hinder them, plus or minus, said Mr. Beebe. Degree they are worth it. Plus or minus. Unlatching the gate, he sauntered over the triangular green, to Sissy Villa. Degree hello, plus or minus, he cried, shouting in at the open door, through which much squalor was visible. A grave voice replied, Degree hello, plus or minus. Degree Ive brought someone to see you. Plus or minus. Degree I'll be down in a minute. Plus or minus. The passage was blocked by a wardrobe, which the removal men had failed to carry up the stairs. Mr. Beebe edged round it with difficulty. The sitting room itself was blocked with books. Degree are these people great readers, plus or minus, Freddie whispered. Degree are they that sort, plus or minus. Degree, I fancy they know how to read, a rare accomplishment. What have they got? Byron. Exactly. A Shropshire lad. Never heard of it. The Way of All Flesh. Never heard of it. Gibbon. Hello. Dear George reads German. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and so we go on. Well, I suppose your generation knows its own business, Honeychurch. Plus or minus. Degree Mr. Beebe, look at that, plus or minus, said Freddie in awestruck tones. On the cornice of the wardrobe, the hand of an amateur had painted this inscription: Degree mistrust all enterprises that require new clothes. Plus or minus. Degree I know. Isn't it jolly? I like that. I am certain that the old man doing. Plus or minus. Degree how very odd of him, plus or minus. Degree, surely you agree, plus or minus. But Freddie was his mother's son and felt that one ought not to go on spoiling the furniture. Degree pictures, plus or minus, the clergyman continued, scrambling about the room. Degree Giotto, they got that at Florence, I'll be bound. Plus or minus. Degree the same as Lucy's got. Plus or minus. Degree, oh, by the by, did Miss Honeychurch enjoy London, plus or minus. Degree she came back yesterday. Plus or minus. Degree, I suppose she had a good time, plus or minus. Degree yes, very, plus or minus, said Freddie, taking up a book. Degree she and Cecil are thicker than ever. Plus or minus. Degree that's good hearing. Plus or minus. Degree, I wish I wasn't such a fool, Mr. Beebe. Plus or minus. Mr. Beebe ignored the remark. Degree Lucy used to be nearly as stupid as I am, but it'll be very different now, mother thinks. She will read all kinds of books. Plus or minus. Degree so will you. Plus or minus. Degree only medical books. Not books that you can talk about afterwards. Cecil is teaching Lucy Italian, and he says her playing is wonderful. There are all kinds of things in it that we have never noticed. Cecil says, plus or minus. Degree what on earth are those people doing upstairs? Emerson, we think we come another time. Plus or minus. George ran downstairs and pushed them into the room without speaking. Degree, let me introduce Mr. Honeychurch, a neighbor. Plus or minus. Then Freddie hurled one of the thunderbolts of youth. Perhaps he was shy, perhaps he was friendly, or perhaps he thought that George's face wanted washing. At all events he greeted him with, "Degree, how do ye do? Come and have a bathe. Plus or minus." Degree, "Oh, all right, plus or minus," said George, impassive. Mr. Beebe was highly entertained. "Degree, how do ye do? How do ye do? Come and have a bathe, plus or minus," he chuckled. Degree, that's the best conversational opening I've ever heard. But I am afraid it will only act between men. Can you picture a lady who has been introduced to another lady by a third lady opening civilities with "How do you do? Come and have a bathe?" And yet you will tell me that the sexes are equal. Plus or minus. Degree, I tell you that they shall be, plus or minus, said Mr. Emerson, who had been slowly descending the stairs. Degree, good afternoon, Mr. Beebe. I tell you they shall be comrades, and George thinks the same. Plus or minus. Degree, we are to raise ladies to our level, plus or minus, the clergyman inquired. Degree, the Garden of Eden, plus or minus, pursued Mr. Emerson, still descending. Degree, which you place in the past, is really yet to come. We shall enter it when we no longer despise our bodies. Plus or minus. Mr. Beebe disclaimed placing the Garden of Eden anywhere. Degree, in this, not in other things, we men are ahead. We despise the body less than women do. But not until we are comrades shall we enter the garden. Plus or minus. Degree, I say, what about this bathe? Plus or minus, murmured Freddie, appalled at the mass of philosophy that was approaching him. Degree, I believed in a return to nature once. But how can we return to nature when we have never been with her? Today, I believe that we must discover nature. After many conquests, we shall attain simplicity. It is our heritage. Plus or minus. Degree, let me introduce Mr. Honeychurch, whose sister you will remember at Florence. Plus or minus. Degree, how do you do? Very glad to see you, and that you are taking George for a bathe. Very glad to hear that your sister is going to marry. Marriage is a duty. I am sure that she will be happy, for we know Mr. Vyse, too. He has been most kind. He met us by chance in the National Gallery, and arranged everything about this delightful house. Though I hope I have not vexed Sir Harry Otway. I have met so few liberal landowners, and I was anxious to compare his attitude towards the game laws with the conservative attitude. Ah, this wind. You do well to bathe. Yours is a glorious country, Honeychurch, plus or minus. Degree, not a bit, plus or minus, mumbled Freddie. Degree, I must, that is to say, I have to have the pleasure of calling on you later on, my mother says, I hope. Plus or minus. Degree _ call _ my lad? Who taught us that drawing room twaddle? Call on your grandmother. Listen to the wind among the pines. Yours is a glorious country. Plus or minus. Mr. Beebe came to the rescue. Degree, Mr. Emerson, he will call, I shall call, you or your son will return our calls before 10 days have elapsed. I trust that you have realized about the 10 days interval. It does not count that I helped you with the stair-eyes yesterday. It does not count that they are going to bathe this afternoon. Plus or minus. Degree, yes, go and bathe, George. Why do you dawdle talking? Bring them back to tea. Bring back some milk, cakes, honey. The change will do you good. George has been working very hard at his office. I can't believe he's well. Plus or minus. George bowed his head, dusty and somber, exhaling the peculiar smell of one who has handled furniture. Degree, do you really want this bathe? Plus or minus, Freddie asked him. Degree, it is only a pond. Don't you know? I dare say you are used to something better. Plus or minus. Degree yes, I have said yes already. Plus or minus. Mr. Beebe felt bound to assist his young friend, and led the way out of the house and into the pine woods. How glorious it was! For a little time the voice of old Mr. Emerson pursued them, dispensing good wishes and philosophy. It ceased, and they only heard the fair wind blowing the bracken and the trees. Mr. Beebe, who could be silent, but who could not bear silence, was compelled to chatter, since the expedition looked like a failure, and neither of his companions would utter a word. He spoke of Florence. George attended gravely, assenting or dissenting with slight but determined gestures that were as inexplicable as the motions of the treetops above their heads. Degree, and what a coincidence that you should meet Mr. Vyse. Did you realize that you would find all the pension Bertolini down here, plus or minus? Degree, I did not. Miss Lavish told me. Plus or minus. Degree, when I was a young man, I always meant to write a history of coincidence. Plus or minus. No enthusiasm. Degree, though, as a matter of fact, coincidences are much rarer than we suppose. For example, it isn't purely coincidentally that you are here now, when one comes to reflect. Plus or minus. To his relief, George began to talk. Degree, it is. I have reflected. It is fate. Everything is fate. We are flung together by fate, drawn apart by fate, flung together, drawn apart. The 12 winds blow us, we settle nothing. Plus or minus. Degree, you have not reflected at all. Plus or minus, rapped the clergyman. Degree, let me give you a useful tip, Emerson, attribute nothing to fate. Don't say, I didn't do this, for you did it, 10 to 1. Now I'll cross-question you. Where did you first meet Miss Honeychurch and myself, plus or minus? Degree, Italy. Plus or minus. Degree, and where did you meet Mr. Vyse, who was going to marry Miss Honeychurch, plus or minus? Degree, National Gallery. Plus or minus. Degree, looking at Italian art. There you are, and yet you talk of coincidence and fate. You naturally seek out things Italian, and so do we, and our friends. This narrows the field immeasurably. We meet again in it. Plus or minus. Degree, it is fate that I am here, plus or minus, persisted George. Degree, but you can call it Italy if it makes you less unhappy. Plus or minus. Mr. Beebe slid away from such heavy treatment of the subject. But he was infinitely tolerant of the young, and had no desire to snub George. Degree, and so for this, and for other reasons, my history of coincidence is still to write. Plus or minus. Silence. Wishing to round off the episode, he added, Degree, we are all so glad that you have come. Plus or minus. Silence. Degree, here we are, plus or minus, called Freddie. Degree, oh, good, plus or minus, exclaimed Mr. Beebe, mopping his brow. Degree, in there's the pond. I wish it was bigger, plus or minus, he added apologetically. They climbed down a slippery bank of pine needles. There lay the pond, set in its little alp of green, only a pond, but large enough to contain the human body, and pure enough to reflect the sky. On account of the rains, the waters had flooded the surrounding grass, which showed like a beautiful emerald path, tempting these feet towards the central pool. Degree, it's distinctly successful, as ponds go, plus or minus, said Mr. Beebe. Degree, no apologies are necessary for the pond. Plus or minus. George sat down where the ground was dry, and drearily unlaced his boots. Degree, aren't those masses of willow herb splendid? I love willow herb in seed. What's the name of this aromatic plant, plus or minus? No one knew, or seemed to care. Degree, these abrupt changes of vegetation, this little spongish tract of water plants, and on either side of it all the growths are tough or brittle heather, bracken, hurts, pines. Very charming. Plus or minus. Degree Mr. Beebe, RNTU bathing, plus or minus called Freddie, as he stripped himself. Mr. Beebe thought he was not. Degree water s wonderful, plus or minus cried Freddie, prancing in. Degree water s water, plus or minus murmured George. Wetting his hair first, a sure sign of apathy. He followed Freddie into the divine, as indifferent as if he were a statue, and the pond a pail of soapsuds. It was necessary to use his muscles. It was necessary to keep clean. Mr. Beebe watched them, and watched the seeds of the willow herb dance chorically above their heads. Degree a pushu, plus or minus went Freddie, swimming for 2 strokes in either direction, and then becoming involved in reeds or mud. Degree is it worth it, plus or minus asked the other, Michelangelesque on the flooded margin. The bank broke away, and he fell into the pool before he had weighed the question properly. Degree he poof IV swallowed a pollywog, Mr. Beebe, water s wonderful. Water s simply ripping. Plus or minus. Degree water s not so bad, plus or minus said George, reappearing from his plunge, and sputtering at the sun. Degree water s wonderful. Mr. Beebe, do. Plus or minus. Degree a pushu, kuf. Plus or minus. Mr. Beebe, who was hot, and who always acquiesced where possible, looked around him. He could detect no parishioners except the pine trees, rising up steeply on all sides, and gesturing to each other against the blue. How glorious it was! The world of motor cars and rural deans receded inimitably. Water, sky, evergreens, a wind, these things not even the seasons can touch, and surely they lie beyond the intrusion of man? Degree, I may as well wash 2 plus or minus, and soon his garments made a third little pile on the sward, and he too asserted the wonder of the water. It was ordinary water, nor was there very much of it, and, as Freddie said, it reminded one of swimming in a salad. The 3 gentlemen rotated in the pool breast high, after the fashion of the nymphs in G. Turd, Marung. But either because the rains had given a freshness, or because the sun was shedding a most glorious heat, or because 2 of the gentlemen were young in years, and the 3rd young in spirit, for some reason or other a change came over them, and they forgot Italy and botany and fate. They began to play. Mr. Beebe and Freddie splashed each other. A little deferentially, they splashed George. He was quiet, they feared they had offended him. Then all the forces of youth burst out. He smiled, flung himself at them, splashed them, ducked them, kicked them, muddied them, and drove them out of the pool. Degree race you round it, then, plus or minus cried Freddie, and they raced in the sunshine, and George took a short cut and dirted his shins, and had to bathe a second time. Then Mr. Beebe consented to run, a memorable sight. They ran to get dry, they bathed to get cool, they played at being Indians in the willow herbs, and in the bracken, they bathed to get clean. And all the time 3 little bundles lay discreetly on the sward, proclaiming, Degree no. We are what matters. Without us shall no enterprise begin. To us shall all flesh turn in the end. Plus or minus. Degree a try. A try, plus or minus, yelled Freddie, snatching up George's bundle and placing it beside an imaginary goalpost. Degree soccer rules, plus or minus, George retorted, scattering Freddie's bundle with a kick. Degree goal, plus or minus. Degree goal, plus or minus. Degree pass, plus or minus. Degree take care my watch, plus or minus, cried Mr. Beebe. Clothes flew in all directions. Degree take care my hat. No, that's enough, Freddie. Dress now. No, I say, plus or minus. But the two young men were delirious. Away they twinkled into the trees, Freddie with a clerical waistcoat under his arm, George with a wide-awake hat on his dripping hair. Degree that LL do, plus or minus, shouted Mr. Beebe, remembering that after all he was in his own parish. Then his voice changed as if every pine tree was a rural dean. Degree high. Steady on. I see people coming, you fellows, plus or minus. Yells and widening circles over the dappled earth. Degree high. High. Underscore ladies, underscore plus or minus. Neither George nor Freddie was truly refined. Still, they did not hear Mr. Beebe's last warning, or they would have avoided Mrs. Honeychurch, Cecil, and Lucy, who were walking down to call on old Mrs. Butterworth. Freddie dropped the waistcoat at their feet and dashed into some bracken. George hooped in their faces, turned and scudded away down the path to the pond, still clad in Mr. Beebe's hat. Degree gracious alive, plus or minus, cried Mrs. Honeychurch. Degree whoever were those unfortunate people? Oh, dears, look away. And poor Mr. Beebe, too. Whatever has happened, plus or minus. Degree come this way immediately, plus or minus, commanded Cecil, who always felt that he must lead women, though he knew not whither, and protect them, though he knew not against what. He led them now, towards the bracken where Freddie sat concealed. Degree, oh, poor Mr. Beebe. Was that his waistcoat we left in the path? Cecil. Mr. Beebe's waistcoat, plus or minus. No business of ours, said Cecil, glancing at Lucy, who was all parasol and evidently degree-minded. Plus or minus. Degree, I fancy Mr. Beebe jumped back into the pond. Plus or minus. Degree this way, please, Mrs. Honeychurch, this way. Plus or minus. They followed him up the bank, attempting the tense yet nonchalant expression that is suitable for ladies on such occasions. Degree well, underscore I underscore can't help it, plus or minus, said a voice close ahead, and Freddie reared a freckled face and a pair of snowy shoulders out of the fronds. Degree I. Can't he be trodden on, can I, plus or minus? Degree, good gracious me, dear, so it s you. What miserable management. Why not have a comfortable bath at home, with hot and cold laid on, plus or minus? Degree look here, mother, a fellow must wash, and a fellow's got to dry, and if another fellow, plus or minus. Degree dear, no doubt you re-write as usual, but you are in no position to argue. Come, Lucy. Plus or minus, they turned. Degree, oh, look Don T look. Oh, poor Mr. Beebe. How unfortunate again, plus or minus. For Mr. Beebe was just crawling out of the pond, on whose surface garments of an intimate nature did float, while George, the world-weary George, shouted to Freddie that he had hooked a fish. Degree and me, Ive swallowed one, plus or minus, answered he of the bracken. Degree Ive swallowed a pollywog. It wriggleth in my tummy. I shall die immersin you. Beast, you've got on my bags. Plus or minus. Degree hush, dears, plus or minus, said Mrs. Honeychurch, who found it impossible to remain shocked. Degree and do be sure you dry yourselves thoroughly first. All these colds come of not drying thoroughly. Plus or minus. Degree mother, do come away, plus or minus, said Lucy. Degree oh for goodness sake, do come. Plus or minus. Degree hello, plus or minus, cried George, so that again the ladies stopped. He regarded himself as dressed barefoot, bare-chested, radiant and personable against the shadowy woods. He called. Degree hello, Miss Honeychurch. Hello, plus or minus. Degree bow, Lucy, better bow. Whoever is it? I shall bow. Plus or minus. Miss Honeychurch bowed. That evening and all that night the water ran away. On the morrow the Pool had shrunk to its old size and lost its glory. It had been a call to the blood and to the relaxed will, a passing benediction whose influence did not pass, a holiness, a spell, a momentary chalice for youth.